Okay, well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. We have an amazing contingent from Auckland, Australia, and the USA here today. A big thanks to Sarah Correll for really setting up an extraordinary tribe of which today is a part of. And also our thoughts to Scott, my brother in conversation, who's currently on a cruise. When you do listen to this, Scott, remember that we do miss you and look forward to having you back next month. Today is a really special day and an extraordinary conversation with a man I've got to know well and I really respect and value deeply. I'm going to give you a bit of a bio first and then kick off with the vision for today's conversation. So, Robert Kilsby brings over 3 decades of leadership experience in environments where performance is non negotiable and consequences are real. Serving 22 years in the Australian military, mostly including roles within the special operations, and as I said, at the SAS, he operated in high-risk, high-pressure contexts where decision-making, clarity, and accountability directly impacted outcomes. Following his military career, he transitioned into the corporate sector, specializing in sales and marketing and crisis and emergency management. In the latter, working with national and international organizations, he has trained and guided leaders to maintain performance, cohesion, and decision integrity amid uncertainty and disruption. Through this period, Robert consistently competed at a high level in national tarmac rally competition, achieving Australian top 10 status even as a low-funded privateer, utilizing this platform to conduct the national program Veterans in Motorsport Australia to assist military veterans in their recovery from physical and psychological ills and transition challenges. Across these sport, business, and military domains, Robert has developed a clear, practical understanding of what underpins elite performance at the highest levels of leadership, not in theory but in application. His work is focused on the principles and behaviors required to lead effectively when complexity is high, time is limited, and the margin for error is minimal. Elite leadership of mission-critical performance is built on these lived experiences and is intended for leaders aspiring to operate at or are operating where outcomes matter and accountability is obsolete. This is Rob's second conversation with us. The first was on his first book, which is an extraordinary book and really worth getting. This is currently in manuscript form. And in speaking to Robert last night, I noted that although this is directed at fairly high levels of leadership where the quality of leadership is critical, I really believe that this book embodies some really core principles and values for all of us to look at how we lead ourselves in critical missions, which is going to happen in our lives. What came to me as I was talking to Rob, and I wrote it down, was that we all will live at times at the edges of who we are. In the face of what can feel like overwhelming discomfort, we are offered an opportunity to discover our core strengths and attributes and values. And I think this book has tremendous value for us to look at those attributes and to bring them in, not the easy day living of our lives, but the times when our lives and challenge and change and the discomfort of it really creep around the edges of ourselves. I think it's got value for parenting and value for our own personal journeys. What I would suggest is, because it's going to be quite a dense conversation, is make a note of kind of things Rob might raise that resonated deeply with you. And at the end of the conversation, we'll open up for discussion, and you're welcome to raise what aspects of his manuscript, book to be, came up for you. Rob, welcome here today, brother, and looking forward to a deep dive into this new book.
Yeah, thanks, Barry, and thanks everybody. It's a privilege to be here, and I'm looking forward to the first unpack of the book. It's as you say, it's pretty comprehensive. So we'll just touch on things as we go through. That there's a lot to cover, so I won't sort of go too detailed on any one piece. But there's some important things here, as you mentioned. Not just for leaders, but for life as well. I think that people can take on, at whatever level they're operating at. Extrapolate out to that, because lot of people have said to me, well, I'm not in a leadership position or something like that. And I said, well, I normally ask, oh, well, are you a parent? They say, yeah. Most people say, yeah, I'm a parent. And I said, well, that's raw leadership, Jack, right there and then. And the consequences are high. The margin for error is small, if not zero at times with your kids. Um, and there's a lot of import in that first 20 years when you're nurturing them right through where you let them go and fly. So leadership extends right down to biological levels, in my view. But this book is obviously aimed at what I call the level 4 or the top level of leadership. My first book was Ultimate Freedom: The 5 Fundamental Principles to Be in Charge of Yourself, which is all about really self mastery. It wasn't projected as particularly as a leadership book, although obviously is. It's the foundation of all leadership. Seneca the Younger once said 2,000 years ago that if you can't lead yourself, it's very hard to lead other people. So the foundation of that is level 1 of my what I call RK, ARKAY, which is my initials RK, leadership continuum, which I cheekily claim as my own. So level 1 is the self mastery, being in charge of yourself. Level 2 is where most leaders live and talk about and walk the path and try and be better leaders and so on. This is called what I call structural leadership. They write books about it. They talk about it. That's where most leaders live as a natural, first development stage. Then some leaders will go on to being in positions where there's a lot of pressure. So the third level 3, L3, is leadership under pressure. This is where uncertainty starts to rise. The stakes become higher and the consequences become higher, and the margin for error decreases. But it's not an absolutely full-on time. And level 4 is the peak of all that, where there's very low to zero margin of error in some cases. The consequences are very high and often irreversible. The uncertainty is usually pretty full. It's very difficult to know a lot about what's happening. So this is a very critical area of leadership, and we often find even as high as governments getting into trouble with this because they're not ready for it. When I was in the business of crisis management consultancy and so on, I used to say to the big management teams, you're not getting the big bucks for what you do today. You're going to get the big bucks for what you might have to do tomorrow, for things you haven't thought about yet. And of course, so we'll touch on this as we go through, but and I'll mention this now to put it up in lights. In the last few years, it's all about the buzzword, if I can use that term, is about resilience. Resilience here, resilience there, resilience everywhere, and that's all very well. But resilience actually is reactive, and the true proof of the top level of leadership is readiness. Resilience is important. It's being able to recover from the blows of life. Life is just a succession of terrain where there's a lot of valleys and a lot of ridges, peaks and valleys. But resilience is important to recover from that. But as I've said in the book down the back end there, one of my quotes in there is, winter always comes. Elite leaders prepare for spring. So I think that's it sounds a bit philosophical, but it's true. So that at the top level of leadership, L4, That's where leaders have to be. They've got to be basically ready for failure. They have to prepare for things to fail, which is an interesting concept when you think about most people's lives. They don't spend a lot of time preparing for failure. But we're not talking about the general average run of the mill here. But as we've said, it still pertains to things right at home there with your parents and your children and things like that. There's all sorts of disasters can happen in the spur of the moment, as in combat, for example. But so you've got to be preparing, and you've got to have, in my view, what I call the helicopter view. If you're in the helicopter with me, you'll be able to see a long way. Those ridges and valleys all look pretty small when you're in a helicopter, and you think, oh, there's more of them than what I thought. So it's called vision, and I think that's a good thing to remember. It's an easy picture, is you get up in the helicopter, and you can see a long way, and deal with a lot of problems that you didn't think were going to be there, and so on. I just got to note my internet is a little bit unstable. Am I broken there, Barry?
No, 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 you're good, Rob. And also I want to say that
Okay.
as you've been talking, and I know from a leadership point of
Yeah.
view, they're really critical things, but also I'm also reflecting back on personal, chronological, and developmental journeys that we go through every day. And I can see that the map that you're raising today and you're slowly growing for us relates to every time we get up every day over all moments of our lives till the day we breathe our last breath and the challenges that face us. That map you can overlay. So just keep going, Matt. It's really interesting.
Yeah, so that's why this when I wrote the first book, I never thought I'd write a book. First up, but everyone said, oh, you should write a book. You've had an interesting life, and if you don't write a book, the kids won't remember you when you're older and things like that. That's the common public viewpoint, it seems. But but when I decided on the third battlefield, as I call it, the new mission to be a keynote speaker, I decided that I actually had to write a bit about myself, which I'd been adverse to show people where the principles, those 5 fundamental principles come from. And I thought after that, oh, this is good. I've ticked that box, so I won't have to write another book. And then I realized if I'm talking about leadership, you can't leave things unfinished. So I've, I've now written 2 books, and uh, and I've finished that. The book's in with publication at the moment. So hopefully by the end of September, early October, it should be in hand, which would be good. Much to the happiness of my wife, who will try and remember who I am instead of sitting in my office banging away on the keyboard. So all these times. So that's what this book exists. It's not a book about or for leadership in ideal conditions, actually. It's not about polished theory detached from consequence. And of course, it's not about leadership as status or position or personality. It's about elite leadership where performance matters most. It's about leading when outcomes are important, when the pace is unforgiving, and when the environment demands more than good intentions and compassion. It's about the disciplines and the standards and the habits and the mindset required to preserve these things: clarity, cohesion, and effective action when escalation takes hold. The introduction in the book, I thought calling it an introduction, like in most books, I thought that'd be pretty boring. So I've actually called that escalation, just to be a bit different, because that's what happens in life. Things escalate, often beyond where you think they're going to. So it's very important to be in that helicopter and understand what's happening ahead of you. So Barry, just looking at the rough plan of action here. I think the first part of the book is about I'll just take a step here. In the book, I've done something which a couple of people said that's cheeky, and I've put a reader operational contract in there. And I've said this book is not intended for passive reading. It's a field manual for self-leadership under pressure, uncertainty, and consequence. So it's sort of like a contract you can do with yourself, saying, if I'm going to read this book, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, I'm going to tick this, I'm going to do that, I'm going to take it on, I'm going to do it seriously. So I thought, oh, well, you're only alive once. I'll put that in for everybody. That's good. So that's an unusual thing. So part one is about the, to set the scene. It's about the reality of high stakes leadership, looking at reality. And I started off with chapter one with, it's interesting. Chapter one is called No Prizes for Second Place. And it's based on an old SAS saying, in the two-way rifle range, there are no prizes for second place. So, in fact, that was my first working title for the book. So it's all about, I noticed in previous years now that people were giving out prizes for, to kids for just turning up and breathing, just being part of it. The book is underlaid with this very powerful theme, which is sport, business, and warfare are all the same activities. It's just the stakes that are different. So they're remarkably similar. Many areas of life, second place is celebrated as we made it onto the podium moment. In many areas of life, second place is disappointing but acceptable. In sport, even in extreme sport, which can still be called what I'd call progressive meritocracy, there are still points awarded for less than first place. Formula One, for example, gives points right down to number 10, on the grid, in terms of the result. That said, in some environments, it's increasingly unacceptable. In business, it may mean lost revenue, missed opportunity, damage to reputation, and even more catastrophic loss. In a small number of environments, second place carries a very different meaning, though. It'll indicate directly that the mission has failed. It may mean that capital or indispensable operational equipment may not be replaced. In some primarily military mission-critical environments, it may mean that people have been injured or killed. It means and shows consequences that in many cases can't be reversed. So this is the general thread underlying the philosophy of the book. So that's about the first chapter. What I like to do is, there's a number of chapters here. So I've done the similar format that I've done in the first book, and I've got the three top where are we? I'm just scrolling down here to make sure I get this right. So the top three highlight points for each chapter. So because there's a fair bit in it, I'll just maybe touch on the chapters like this. So the top three highlight points for no prizes at second place is that first one is consequence defines the level of leadership. At level 4, failure is final, visible, and often irreversible. Leadership must match the stakes, not the environment. So this is what leadership is about at the top level. Number 2, you don't rise under pressure, you default. So performance in critical moments reflects prior preparation, not intention, effort, or talent in the moment. Number 3 is decide early, execute late. Elite teams remove decision-making from the moment of pressure by preloading clarity, roles, and actions in advance. That's what the top teams do. So it's setting yourself up for success to deal with failure. if I can sort of pull that out of the top of my head there. The other thing is the next one is chapter 2, which I've called the collapse of conventional leadership. So it starts with the most accurate quote about business, about leadership that's ever been wrote, according to many. And this is by Dwight D. Eisenhower, the famous the leader of Normandy, the D-Day, and also American president. And he said really something very interesting, which sometimes people got to think about. Plans are useless, but planning is indispensable. So plans are useless. You think, crikey, fancy a guy like that saying that. Plans are useless, but planning is indispensable. And this is because as going down the scale a little bit, even the old boxer, Mike Tyson, said, the boxer's plan goes out the door as soon as he's hit in the face. But the planning is indispensable. So that's a very interesting thing, I think, to start this chapter off. And I've used one thing I'll alert you to is that in this book, interestingly, there's 33 stories or vignettes that cover the chapters. And I wasn't intending to do that. I thought, well, I'll bring in a few stories to prove this element or prove that element of leadership. But as it went on, I thought, well, people generally think pictorially, so it's a great way to bring the reality of life and message to people when they see various studies and case studies and histories and stories. And I'm bold enough to even put 4 of those 33 of my stories that I personally went through in my life. So we've got a lot of business stories, got great elite sports stories, and also some coming from the military. So in the top 3 highlight points of this chapter is the first one is planning is not prediction. It's cognitive conditioning for uncertainty. Right? This is a high-level leadership. Planning is not prediction. It's cognitive conditioning for uncertainty. So at this level, planning trains leaders and teams to think, adapt, and act when the plan fails, not to rely on the plan holding. So, it's a different bit of territory for a lot of people because they don't work at this high consequence level typically. But many leaders want to be better leaders, and this is the area that they're really aspiring to be able to do. Leadership, number 2, is leadership collapses in 2 ways: failure to align or failure to commit. So, and I use the Nokia and the Kodak stories in here. Nokia could not move as one system, and Kodak could not move away from what it was. Both lost speed for a variety of reasons, and therefore survival. And the real enemy is not uncertainty, it's attachment to certainty. So, these are sort of unusual ways of thinking for some people, but they're true, and they've been around for thousands of years. So clinging to the plan or the past creates rigidity. Level 4 leadership demands the opposite: clarity under pressure, decisive moment, and the willingness to act before comfort arrives. So these are the pretty heady things here. So going on to one of the main points in the book really is that pressure reveals the leader, chapter 3. If Scott Duncan was here today, Marine Corps Colonel retired, he'd love this one because it starts with a quote: "We've been looking for the enemy for some time now. We've finally found him. We're surrounded. That simplifies the problem." From the great Marine General Chesty Puller, talking about the Chosin Reservoir battle in Korea. So Scott would love that one. Once a Marine, always a Marine, I reckon, in America. This is the first time where I use one of my own stories in this chapter, where I talk about the first time I was shot at and what happened, in my emotions and things like that. So it's a very short story, but pretty powerful. because of that. So the top three things that come out of this chapter are interesting because this is about how people operate, at a very personal level. With each of these chapters, there's leadership insights for each of them, and which is very important because everyone can read this book and apply these to their own lives and their own business and their own explorations of themselves as well. So the top three things coming out, the top three highlight points coming out of this chapter, Pressure Reveals the Leader, is under extreme pressure, people do not perform at the level of their ambition. They perform at the level of their conditioning. And, for those on the call and those not on the call who run teams and, have staff and employees and so on, or even in a sports team or business team, certainly in the military, they'll know this is very true. They perform at the level of their conditioning. What are they ready for? So pressure at L4 is never singular. That's the other thing too. It's there's an old saying, be a sponge, not a rock, which I mentioned to Natalie the other day. Things work better when you're in teams, and I'll talk about teams later on. So consequence, uncertainty, time, complexity, judgment, and internal expectation, they converge simultaneously to disrupt clarity, decisions, and execution. So life gets in the way, right? So they don't come, there's that old saying, problems always come in threes or something, those sort of things, And we're all used to those old sayings, but that's where they come from this reality. Pressure at L4 is never singular. There's a whole bunch of things typically happen, many of which you weren't ready for unless you're prepared for it. So, and three, elite teams do not train merely for resilience to recover from disruption. And a lot of teams do because that's what they know. They know resilience. But the elite teams, they train for readiness, the state to be able to effectively handle anything that comes, and the ability to continue effective action when the plan breaks down. So this is an important sort of differential there. So to me, that's a really significant chapter because it sets the scene. Now, chapter 4 is seeing
Rob,
clearly.
Can I jump in just to
Yeah, please.
summarize? What I love about your part one, the reality of elite teams, is that continuously as you're talking, I'm reflecting back on a more individual, personal level. And I think what comes to me is that the choice we have every day is to what quality of leadership do we bring into the day that faces us, into the week that faces us, and that it's not about just waiting for the day, it's the preparation, and as you put it, the preparation for failure. And I think that's the greatest challenge, is not waiting for the adversity, the discomfort, or the failure to rise up in front of us. But we've wired in the capacity to know how to manage, adjust, and adapt to it. So I think you've raised some fairly critical things, both at a leadership level in organizations, but at a personal intention in terms of what is our intent every day? What's the discipline we bring to our lives every day to prepare for what may or may not lie ahead that is still not yet determined or clear? So great points. Thank you. And I think let's have a look now at the cognitive engine of leadership. Some good stuff there.
Yeah. So now we start to get into how best to think about this and how the mind works and so on. So this chapter is called Seeing Clearly, chapter 4, and I start with a quote from Marcus Aurelius, our old mate, the emperor, going back a bit close to 2,000 years, and he says, "Everything we hear is an opinion, not a fact. Everything we see is a perspective, not the truth." So I think that's got a lot of truth in today's world, especially. Anyone ever heard of the term fake news or things like that, right? Marcus Aurelius said, what I see may not be true, what I believe may be incomplete, and therefore my interpretation may be distorted. So this chapter is not truly about eyesight; it's about perception, filtering, interpretation, and disciplined acquisition of reality. And in fact, it's equated to the underlying thread in the book, which I reveal later in the book. I'm a great fan of the OODA loop, from John Boyd, the US fighter pilot and strategist. But I didn't want to say, hey guys, this is all about the OODA loop up front, because there'll be people saying, oh, that sounds a bit mystic. I think I'll leave the book, if they didn't know about it. But the OODA loop is a terrific decision framework for people, and you can use it right down to individual level, right up to the hundreds of thousands of people in a team. So the first O is observe. So this chapter is really about that. Is not, it's about perception, filtering, interpretation, discipline, acquisition of reality. And seeing clearly is not passive seeing. The mature elite leadership tasks required to operate and succeed are not those of just observing events. The elite leaders built systems that reveal reality faster and more accurately than competitors and adversaries. This is this loop, and it's cyclic. It's not linear. So this, to me, this is a very, most people, I find in my life observation is they feel that they can only base things on assumption. They get a bit of information and they say, oh, just think that's the way to go. But this is not about that. And in fact, later we'll get to what I call the military appreciation process, how to deal with that. And so it's all about preparation, and observation is competitive. In mission critical environments, observation itself becomes a battlefield. It doesn't occur in isolation. So let's go to the top 3 highlight points. I use our US brothers and sisters in the book, in the call here. I use one of my own examples or stories here, where I was working with the SEAL team in Vietnam, the SEAL Team 1, November platoon down in the Delta there. The story there, it's about being prepared and running their own thing. So yeah, there's some interesting stuff there. But going to the top 3 highlight points for seeing clearly. Understand this, that most catastrophic failures begin as perception failures before they become execution failures. I'll just say that again because it's important. Most catastrophic failures begin as perception failures before they become execution failures. There's a lot more nuance in this stuff. Under pressure, number 2, under pressure, people do not usually become more aware. They become more selective. That's just the way. That's the way the human brain works. It's science-backed. This stuff that I did a fair bit of research scientifically, but make sure I wasn't going outside the framework. 3, the greatest competitive advantage in any high-stakes environment is seeing reality before others do. That's a competitive advantage. That, in other words, if you can, and this comes from the fighter pilot John Boyd, who made this loop. It was born out of battle, if you like. And if you can turn quicker than the other guy with your loop, you're inside his loop, and therefore that's a competitive advantage. And you can apply that to all aspects of your life, and certainly to being a good leader and a good team. So and just on this, I actually use a quote at the back end of this, which comes from Arthur Wellesley, who actually some people would know him as the Duke of Wellington, the first Duke of Wellington, who fought Napoleon in the Spanish Wars just after the 1800s. And he said, the business of war, indeed, the business of life, is to discover what you don't know from what you do, and to guess what lies on the other side of the hill. You know, in those days, they didn't have the Starlink and the satellites and the whole shooting match. So it's a great quote from the old Duke. Chapter 5 is So What? It's called, that's a hell of a title for a chapter. So what? And I put in a quote there from Jim Rohn: the wind blows the same for everybody. It's the set of the sails that makes the difference. The great Jim Rohn. So this is, and I use a couple of sailing stories in this one. The near tragedy, or the tragedy of the Sydney to Hobart race in going back to the 1989, where they lost sailors and had many injured and so on, and also the sail GP race, which goes around the world these days. With the big catamarans that flog along 60 miles an hour through the water. They fly, really. And the thing about this So What is about the appreciation process. This is, and I use the word so what because you come up with something, and then to make sure they appreciate fully, you've got to ask the question, well, so what? So X is so what? X is, and therefore Y is so and so. Well, so what? We're talking about digging down. So I use the iceberg analogy. That the iceberg sits in the water. About 1/10 of the iceberg thereabouts is sitting above the water, and the rest of the iceberg is under the water, obviously, in the dark under the surface. So the bulk of what is real is not being portrayed. And the same goes for people. When you talk to people, when you first meet them, typically what people are showing you is that tip of the iceberg. And you've got to ask so what a lot of times to get down into the wealth of those people, in terms of the richness of them and their experience and so on. You've got to ask a lot of questions. So what? So what? So this is a great chapter to mine. It's the military appreciation process. I will say that a lot of, and we learn this in the military, we use this all the time, but I will say that a lot of people approach this and they do it around the reverse way. They situate the appreciation. So it's sort of like, well, I got a square peg here and there's a round hole. I'm going to bash it in here, and I'll hit it harder if it doesn't fit first. That's called, in other words, you work out what you want and then you force everything to fit it if you can. Now, most people in most of their lives do that, until they learn this business of saying, well, why don't you find a round peg for the round hole? That'd be good. So that's the so what business. So the top three things that come out of this so what chapter is observation is not understanding. Most people see events. Elite leaders interpret implications. Most people just, they're not asking so what. They just see what they see, the tip of the iceberg, and that'll do. Mission critical performance depends on not merely on collecting information, but on correctly understanding what changing conditions mean before consequences accelerate. So this is a very important thing. 2, so what? Creates adaptive thinking. The repeated so what question forces deeper orientation under uncertainty. So this is the second O of OODA, observation, orientation. By continuously examining implications, assumptions, risks, consequences, continually examining it, leaders avoid shallow interpretation and maintain that cognitive flexibility under pressure. This is so important to go through, because if you don't do this, you're not going to be able to manage failure. That's for sure. Orientation, number 3, orientation fails when ego protects assumptions. The greatest danger in leadership is often not a lack of information, but emotional attachment to previous interpretations. And all of us probably have been here, done that in our lives individually, but also have seen it in so many teams, in so many leadership situations. So the greatest danger is not that lack of information, but it's attachment, emotional attachment to those previous interpretations and hanging on to that no matter what. Ego protecting the assumptions. I don't want to be seen where I have to change path here. I don't want to be seen to be lacking. I don't want, that's ego. Elite leaders continually interrogate reality rather than forcing reality to fit the existing plans. So, so what? It's a good one. Okay, so now we're on the chapter 6, which is deciding under uncertainty. All these are important, aren't they? My old mate, Napoleon Bonaparte, says nothing is more difficult and therefore more precious than to be able to decide. I like that one. So, and there's an old military maxim that says, in uncertainty, the worst decision is usually no decision. So do something, in a sense. Actually, interestingly, the story I use, one of the stories in this chapter, is the Thailand Tam Luang cave rescue of 2018. Remember where a young soccer team, about 11 or so boys, were trapped in the caves for a long time, and there was all sorts of help from all over the world, including at the end of the day, Dr. Richard Harry Harris and Dr. Craig Challen from Australia, whose medical judgment, courage, and calm decision-making under pressure became critical to getting them out of there. So that was a fabulous story, and it will live forever, that rescue story. But that's what this chapter is about, in a sense. And also, if you remember, going right back to 1970, for those of you who are old like me, you'll know that the crew of Apollo 13, on their trip to the moon, sort of thing, they, if you remember you probably remember the phrase, no matter how old you are, Houston, we've had a problem. That's that story, which is a cracker. And so I use those. So the 3 main highlight points of this chapter in deciding under uncertainty is elite leaders do not wait for uncertainty. Elite leaders do not wait for certainty. One of the strongest threads in this chapter is the statement, elite leaders do not wait for certainty. They build enough clarity to act. Right? They build enough clarity to act. And you'll have seen this in your own lives from various types of leaders that we've all had pleasure working with and had displeasure working with. This thing here. Number 2, coherent cognition under pressure. Pressure does not remove the need for thinking; it increases it. The motto of the SAS regiment is "Who dares wins." And to try and get people, even within the SAS regiment, to think in more unconventional ways, I concocted I stole the Swedish missile company's Siemens motto, "Who thinks wins," not "Who dares wins." Right? So both major stories, in this one, demonstrate that elite teams stabilize first, orient, continuously prioritize, isolate variables, and adapt incrementally. That's elite cognition under consequence. They maintain coherent thinking inside it under those consequences. And finally, the third point is adaptability over attachment. So the major point in clearly how clearly deciding under certainty demonstrates abandoning ego, abandoning original plans, abandoning sunk cost thinking, while maintaining commitment to the mission. The mission changed, the commitment did not. So a lot of teams find this difficult, and that's part of that ego. We've got to maintain the course, which is important, but it's got to be for the right reasons. And the adaptability is one of the absolute the gems in people that are working under consequence. The chapter 7 is execution without excuse. It's called, and this is about ownership in a sense, right? Which is one of the principles for being in charge of yourself, of course. And I like to say that the excuses are the weeds in the garden of ownership. You've got to get rid of them. So this is a very interesting. There's a couple of comparisons of very interesting raids or military missions in this. One was the Sontai raid, which is probably one of the most successful raids, albeit without result in a sense, in the Vietnam War, where they tried to rescue the prisoners from the prison war camp, which was a fantastic, well done thing. And then of course the tragic effort to Operation Eagle Claw to rescue the Iranian hostages, that were held hostage in 1980, which ended in tragedy. So there's lots of insights come out of this chapter, but the execution without excuse. This is where you really get into the operations of how these things are done. But the top three highlight points from this is, firstly, under pressure, teams do not rise to the occasion. You'll see this in the book a lot because it's sort of one of the main things to hammer. They rise or fall to the level of their preparation. I call it their readiness. People think that, well, come the day of the race, we'll hook in there and do a good job. Well, you'll only do a good job to the extent of your readiness. 2, complexity multiplies vulnerability. Every additional moving part increases friction, coordination demands, and the risk of cascading failure. So this is from the old adage, simplicity is best. In the Operation Eagle Claw, they had so many competing variables, and it was very, very, very complex. And then once one thing started to go, then it cascaded. It was a cascading failure from there. On the other hand, the Sontai raid was kept very simple. It was a comprehensive mission, but everything was simple and there was little friction between bits. Then the next 7 chapters actually are what I call the 7 level 4 leadership principles. So I won't go into
Rob, can I jump in quickly? I think to summarize, I think that those first 7 chapters really paint the picture and the tools, both at a leadership level and for our personal journeys in life. I liked your metaphor of the iceberg, because I think so often what we are aware of consciously is the stuff that's on top of the water. But everything that's under the water is what guides us forward or backwards, depending on how familiar we are with it. Stephen Covey said in the 7 Habits, he said, seek first to understand before we expect to be understood. Now, in those mission critical tools that you do raise, there's always a level of discomfort, because the stuff that lies under the water internally, or even in our environments, that's the stuff where discomfort is. And that's the stuff where we make assumptions, where we fail to take ownership, where we draw conclusions based on emotions. So I think there's some in the part one and the part two are some really critical things. I mean, with that book, what I'd probably do personally is even write down these core mission statements and each day take time to reflect on which ones am I going to bring into my day in preparation for the week, the month, and the journeys, and well as the challenges that are facing me. So I think thanks for bringing that's a really good solid foundation. Um, I'm just wondering at the moment, is there any questions that anybody would like to raise? Or are you happy to carry on into, we'll do a bit of a quick run through the seven principles and then open it up for discussion and self-reflection, see what came up for you guys. Is everybody happy if we carried on with that and then open it up? Okay. All right.
Okay.
So yeah, Rob, let's go through the seven principles and then let's have a discussion after that in terms of what is coming up and how what things resonated for each of the folks' journeys on this call today.
Yeah. So um, I've got to say I'm a big one for principles as opposed to do this now, do that second, do that third type of thing, because, you know, every situation and every person and every team has got its own environment, own mission critical environment, and you can work from principles and adapt to whatever's needed. So this is no different from that, and so I've come up with these leadership principles, which are proven, you know, over the history. This is not new stuff, ladies and gentlemen. This is not something I just thought up. This has been going on for thousands of years. It's just that I'm a good observer and I've matched it to what's happening indeed in our modern life as well. So the first principle is mission primacy, and I'll relate it to the you know, in the Australian and West and broader Western military doctrine, the first principle of war is selection and maintenance of the aim. It's there for a reason. So the first principle of elite performance is the selection and maintenance of the aim. And I'll just, because there's seven of them, I'll just quickly go each of the top 3 points for this chapter. And in fact, this one is, I used the two stories here of the Challenger. If you remember the tragic explosion of the Challenger in 1986 and killing the crew, that was because of some things that happened. You know, it wasn't out of left field in the sense the evidence was there, but they just didn't look at it properly. And the other one is maintenance for the aim, which is extremely good observation. A good one was the Manhattan Project. You know, doing the getting the atom bomb. You know, to finish off the Second World War. It was a very difficult thing to do, just to keep it going amongst all the pressures there. So the top three the top 3 points of this chapter is that mission primacy is not blind commitment to momentum. It's a disciplined commitment to meaningful purpose while remaining anchored to reality. Right? So it's not, oh, well, here we go. Let's crack on along this path. It's constantly watching and making sure you're on the right path as well. Number 2, resilience absorbs shock, and readiness rebuilds capability. You know, you must have resilience, but if you want to go forward, you must have readiness. That's getting ready for failure and what to do about it. And number 3, elite organizations do not preserve performance by protecting ego or routine or institutional comfort. They preserve performance by protecting truthful orientation and maintaining coherent mission focus under pressure. So they preserve performance by protecting truthful orientation. You know, reality hurts, but, you know, that's the only path, really, if you want to do properly, well. And maintaining coherent mission focus under pressure. So mission primacy is the first one. The next one is again, you know, it comes up a lot. Absolute ownership. And the great SEAL team leader, Jocko Willink, said extreme ownership. Leaders must own everything in the world. There is no one else to blame. I like that. You know? And I use a world downhill skier story there. The way he operated, the American skier, one of the best skiers ever in the Alpine downhills. His story, and also the way Starbucks CEO Kevin Johnson got through his the big problem in Starbucks going back to 2018. So the three main points here for this one is about ownership and so on. Is firstly, ownership accelerates adaptation. Excuses consume energy defending the past. You can use the past as two things, right? In two ways. You can use it as a school to learn from, or a club to beat yourself with. Guess what most people do that you meet? They're walking around with a big bag of rocks over their back for decades sometimes. So excuses consume energy defending the past. Ownership redirects energy towards learning, correction, recovery, and mission continuation. So ownership is critical. Number two, elite performance requires intelligent exposure to consequence. Consequence is coming. Winter is coming. It's coming. It's what you do about it that matters. So whether in elite sport, warfare, crisis leadership, or business, meaningful adaptation rarely emerges from permanent safety or hesitation. I noticed in modern life, and many helped out by an army of psychologists, Barry, that we're all looking for a safe place to voice our opinions, and safety is the go. You can be safe, you can share, all this sort of stuff. But there's an old African saying, good sailors are never made in calm waters. So safety, and there's another ancient thing that, ships are safe in the harbour, but that's not what they're built for. And number three is leaders ultimately own the environments their people operate within. The buck stops at the top. The old US president had one on his desk there. Might have been Truman, I think. So culture, standards, systems, and organizational behavior eventually reflect what leadership tolerates, reinforces, ignores, or corrects. It's a leadership thing. Don't pass the buck downwards. I was listening to a podcast last night, very interesting, about the problems that Australia's had with going through this, people judging other people in a war and so on. And, this is this kiss upwards, blame downwards. It's not a good thing. Don't blame downwards. So to me, that's a cracker of a principle. Principle two. Then the third one is standards before crisis. Norman Schwarzkopf, who led he was a general leading into Iraq, when they invaded Iraq, went in there. He said, Stormin Norman, he said, a great leader is an average individual who's extremely well prepared when an incredible event occurs. Not too bad when you think about it. And I use a SEAL team story about, the Buds Hell Week and things like that. And also the All Blacks team, how they have this culture, championship conditioning before the game. So, there's sport, business, and warfare are all the same activities, and these stories really highlight and illuminate that. So looking at the top 3 points for this one is elite performance is usually conditioned before crisis. And the second point is readiness is broader than training alone. So it's not about, you know, the sum of the group is far more powerful than a whole bunch of well-trained individuals, as we know from our life. You know, that's true readiness includes standards, conditioning, emotional control, calm courage, adaptability, communication, collective accountability, and cognition under pressure, just to name a couple. Under the number 3, under pressure, teams rise into or fall beneath their readiness. And I've used, so teams can rise into their readiness if they had a time where they're not operating at the top level, but because they've been conditioned to work that way, they can rise as well as fall back to their readiness. So here's one that I use. The next one, principle 4, is calm under consequence. This is actually one of my principles that I apply for leadership under pressure, you know, with that sort of level 3 in my keynote for that. From a Medal of Honor winner from the Vietnam War, Staff Sergeant Franklin from the US Army, he says, share your fears with yourself, your courage with others, because you will inspire people to do something incredible. So keep your fears to yourself, because as we all know, you know, fear is contagious, but so is courage. Yeah. So the top 3 points to come out of this, and you know, the one of the stories interesting that I use here is flight USA Airways flight 1549, who took off from New York's LaGuardia Airport in 2009, and within a few minutes, the word came across. We're going to be in the Hudson. And he ditched the plane in the Hudson. Brilliant story and fantastic leadership and so on. The other story I use in there, so that lasted a few minutes, and the other story, which lasted many hours, was the biggest battle Australians had in Vietnam, the Battle of Long Tan, where they were outnumbered, over 20 to 1, and they came through that with difficulty. But tremendous things that humans can do under pressure if they're doing the right thing. So the three highlight points for this one is calmness protects cognition. Under pressure, emotional flooding narrows perception, degrades communication, weakens decision making. Calmness stabilizes cognition and preserves functional performance under consequence. I'll just tell you a real quick little story here. We in Vietnam, going right back now, 55 years, we had to take our first water resupply in the dry season. You know, normally you don't want any resupply in SAS patrol. There's only 4 or 5 of you out way behind enemy lines, always outnumbered, long way from help. We had to take this thing. The only place we could take this drop from these water sausages that they chuck out of a chopper for a water resupply was in the edge of a big clearing, and there was a great big track next to it. And we came out of the bush, out of the heavy jungle. And I said, as a young scout, I said to my patrol commander, I said, Graham, this is going to be difficult. The high visibility is only waist-high kunai grass and things, big track going there. And I said, what happens if someone comes along? And he said, he just looked at me very calmly and he said, we'll just shoot him. So I thought, that's reassuring. So I went off to the flank to watch the track if the bad guys came along, and I was happy after that. So calmness protects cognition. Elite calmness is conditioned before crisis. So you can, through repetition and drills and standards and realistic training, build operational stability before consequence arrives. With the calmness training almost. And the 3, teams stabilize around leadership behavior. your teams watch you like a hawk. They're watching you. Things are contagious. Calmness is contagious. Panic is contagious. Remember what Sergeant Franklin said, keep your fears to yourself and give your calm courage to others. So these are the 3 points. To me, calm courage is, it's actually one of my core values. Looking at me on my desk here, I've actually got my core values and I've actually written them down, and I align all my actions to that. And courage is my third one there. And I face all challenges with calm courage. So the next principle 5 is decisive action. As old George Patton once said in World War II, a good plan violently executed now is far better than a perfect plan executed next week, said the general, which has a lot of connotations there, which is good, I think. So looking at the 3 points for this principle, and I use a mission to rescue the hostages in Entebbe as one of the stories there. Fantastic things where decisive action really created the result. And so the top 3 points here are very simple. Action creates momentum, and delay surrenders initiative, and execution reveals leadership. So without any explanation, I think they stand for themselves, those 3 sets of 3 words. The next one is adaptive execution. And this is the old Mike Tyson, everyone's got a plan until they get punched in the mouth. You've got to be able to adapt. And this is very important. And the story I use here actually is one of my own stories where I had a potentially fatal parachute entanglement among 2 other pairs as well in a big parachute jump, where I entangled with another guy, and we got through it, but it was touch and go there for a minute or 2, and also the how Liverpool adapted execution under pressure as well. That story there. So the 3 points for this principle here, adaptive execution, is that the mission matters more than the method. Elite leaders remain committed to the objective, not emotionally attached to the original plan. This is a key thing. When reality changes, execution must adapt. Now, you'll find in normal life that a lot of people are very averse to this idea, we're going to change direction now. Some people freak out, they say, because they don't like change, a lot of people in the average world. But leaders can't be like that. Adaptability requires discipline. It's the second one. You've got to be disciplined. Effective adaptation is not chaos or panic. It depends on preparation, calm cognition, procedural competence, and disciplined execution under pressure. So in other words, this readiness again comes to the fore all the time. And finally, reality always gets a vote. Under pressure, conditions evolve rapidly. Leaders who continuously reassess reality and adapt early create opportunities for recovery, survival, and therefore advantage. So this adaptive execution is just you just got to be adaptable, no matter what the pressures are. Be ready to change path. Last one, principle 7. The last one here is relentless before, during, and after action truth. A long title for a chapter, but it means that it's sort of auditing, and you can do this from a self basis. And, this is the 4th principle of being in charge of yourself, actually being self-aware, being aware. But you've got to run an audit on things. Toyota. There's a story about Toyota in there where they call it the hand on cord things where a worker in a conveyor belt, their conveyor belt production line, any worker can stop that whole production line if he sees something wrong, which is fabulous from a huge company. You'd imagine how many thousands of dollars per second they lose when things stops like that. But that's what they allow regardless of rank or seniority, to stop the entire production. So it's a great story in there regarding this principle. The thing I'd say about this from the top three highlight points is success requires scrutiny. So elite organizations do not relax their standards after success. They understand that success can conceal weaknesses just as easily as failure can expose it. So now we're talking about the higher levels of things, because a lot of teams don't get to this point. Continual reassessment prevents complacency from quietly degrading performance. So number two, the truth must come before ego. We're all humans. We got emotions. It's not about trying to contain or block out emotions. It's dealing through them. Is working through them. You can't. The old leopard can't change the spots. You're gonna have emotions. It's what you do about it that counts. Mission critical teams value reality more highly than comfort or hierarchy or reputation. Honest feedback, challenge, and correction preserve orientation and enable adaptation under pressure. So this is where you start to see, well, can teams, can anybody in the team put their hand up and say, hang on, I see a problem here, right? Even when things are going well. Most important. So that's the end of part 3 there, and what we get on to now is a very important chapter, which is the 7 conditions of elite teams, and I'll just race through them. But a lot of people talk about leadership here, leadership there, and so on. But I've installed another term here. I call it teamship. Elite leaders don't do it by themselves, and they have to bring the part of their responsibility is to bring their level 3, leadership under pressure teams operating there, and bring them up so they can operate at level 4. So this is a really important thing, and I call it teamship. I'll read out this little quote here from a gentleman called Colonel Yasote, and he was an operational commander for one of Genghis Khan's armies back in the 1200, 1300. And he was saying to his general, when the hour of crisis comes, remember that 40 selected men can shake the world. So me being a special operations background sort of guy, I love that. So in other words, teamship is to me is extremely important. And the 7 conditions of these is, 1 is mission clarity. Remember mission primacy being the first principle of elite leadership? Well, in this case, the team needs mission clarity. Everyone's got to understand what's happening. Without mission clarity, effort disperses. The next one is, excuse me, embedded standards. Embedded standards. Standards are not slogans. They must come before crisis. And elite teams know what right looks like, what good looks like, and what unacceptable looks like. And those of us on the call who have the staff and employees and teams, if you want a top team, they've got to know this stuff. The next one is role and authority precision. Everybody in the team knows who owns what, who decides what, and who supports what. And I'll go back to probably the first story in the book is the Red Bull pit crew when they all come out for a tire change. Everybody in that 14 odd people know exactly what bit they've got to do. Everybody else knows what everybody else is doing, and it's all done beforehand. They don't work it out when they get there. So that's probably a good example there too. When Captain Sully decided to ditch in the Hudson River, there was no debate over who held authority. Every crew member immediately executed their role. Pilots flew the aircraft, cabin crew prepared the passengers, air traffic controllers supported the emergency. Right? And, Deborah, from a dispatcher point of view, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Okay, decentralized responsibility. It's interesting that leaders think, well, I'm the man or woman, I'm the guy that tells who what to do. But of course, decentralized responsibility creates initiative, adaptability, and speed. And the leader is just now one of the people. He's got his own particular role to play, or she, but everyone's got their role to play at this elite level. So another one is emotional stability is the norm. Elite teams do not eliminate emotion, but individually and collectively, rather than react, they respond. And number 7, debrief without defensive ego. It's interesting in the special operations world, we debrief constantly. And everybody gets a say, everybody. In the essays, they call it a Chinese parliament. Because everyone's got a different take on things, actually. It's interesting, you have a debrief and you say, what did you see? What did you see? What did you see? And everyone sees something, the same thing from a different perspective. And it's fascinating trying to work all that out, so it's very, very important that everybody gets a crack at it. So in terms of the 3 top highlights of the 7 conditions of elite teams, the first one could be elite performance emerges from conditions. It's not accidental, this high performance. It's a predictable outcome of an environment deliberately designed to support mission-critical execution. The second one is trust and clarity accelerate action. When people understand the mission, trust each other, and know their responsibilities, decision-making becomes faster and more adaptive under pressure. I'll just give a shout out to Matt Kirk here on the call, because Matt runs a team. It's a small team, but there's a terrific synergy in the team. The way Matt operates with his, to me, elite leadership. And so well done, Matt. Your team is a living example of what we're talking about here, I think. And third point is continuous learning sustains excellence. It's not, we've got it now, should be good. When I had built my house, there was 3 quotes a long time ago, and there was 5 quotes, and there was a lot of money between the top and the bottom quote, and all of people said, I've got 20 years experience. And I asked the guy who finally got the job, and he got the job, he was the lowest quote, but he also had the 6 Queensland Houses of the Year awards on his wall. That's why I got the job. And I asked him, how come everyone's got 20 years experience, but the quotes are so incredibly different? And he said, well, what it is, young fella, he said, most people have got 1 year's experience repeated 19 times. And that stayed with me forever. And I heard someone else say it the other day, and not from his building of the house. So it's around, but it was a great learning for me. So continuous learning sustains excellence. The elite teams examine success and failure with equal honesty. Improvement becomes part of the culture rather than a response to mistakes. Okay. So that's the chapter on teamship, in my view. To me, it's very, very important. Now, talking about this, the last condition there, the last principle, where you're reviewing everything, you're doing after-action reports and reviews and so on. The next chapter is actually a really important one, because this is where elite teams do and non-elite teams don't. And I call it success drift. And Bill Gates, who everyone's probably heard of, he says, success is a lousy teacher. It seduces smart people into thinking they can't lose, which I reckon is pretty good. But success rarely announces danger. You know, failure often arrives with warning signs that are obvious in hindsight. Success is different. Success feels reassuring. Success validates decisions. Success reinforces confidence. Success creates a belief that what worked yesterday will continue working tomorrow. And that's precisely why success can actually become one of the greatest threats to elite performance. So the top teams, effectively, they review and audit themselves when things are going well as well. And, you know, there's a military sort of little story here, and you know, Barry will know this from his own time back in the Bush Wars. Teams are often ambushed on the way back from the mission before they get back into the gate, because they're all feeling good about the successful mission. They let their guard down, and you know the sports teams do this and business teams do this, but it can be very difficult if you don't constantly review your success as well as your actions and so on. So the top three points about this one, which you know, this is not an obvious one. Most people miss this one, but top teams do it. You know, the special operations do it. You know, they're saying this is going really, really well. What are we missing? Well, must be something missing here. You know, they suspect everything. And that way they'll catch things which are gradually coming on. Think of the engineering of the Titanic, you know, before it hit the iceberg. It was one of the best engineered things in the world, but there was a lot of little things that cascaded that people didn't notice because they were so puffed with the success of the engineering and so on. And I use that as a story there. So the top three ones of success drift, as I've called the chapter, is pretty good. And these are them. One is success creates new vulnerabilities. The greatest threats to elite performance often emerge during periods of success, not struggle. The greatest threats. Confidence, familiarity, and routine can gradually reduce vigilance and create blind spots. 2, observation must continue after achievement. Very, very important. After achievement, not just failure or not just mistakes. Success does not eliminate risk. Elite leaders remain cautious, challenge assumptions, and continually reassess changing conditions long after success has been achieved. This is level 4. This is the elite level. If you want to be elite, you got to do this stuff. Number 3, the price of success is vigilance. You know, Tommy Hanks, who was a commanding general, I think, for the going into you know, Iraq and so on, the top general, he said, "Freedom ain't free." You know? So the price of success is vigilance. Success is sustained not by past achievement, but by maintaining the discipline, standards, and awareness that created it in the first place. So then the final, what I call the final kinetic chapter, and I started with my quote that I mentioned before: "Winter always comes. Elite leaders prepare for spring." So this is continuity under consequence, and this is about resilience, but this is about being able to get past that recovery and build capability to go on with it. And I use a couple of stories in there. One is the Black Hawk crash, and also the Piper Alpha blow up, where 167 men died in the North Sea. You know, going back to 1988, shocking disaster. But you know, 12 years after the Black Hawk crash, where they lost a full troop of SAS elite specialists and 3 aviation corps crew, the SAS regiment pulled off the most successful aerial assault in Afghanistan only 12 years after that disaster. So this is all about getting back from disaster and continuing on under consequence. So the top 3 points that are coming out of here This is actually a really interesting one because I use that story about that successful assault. And the brigadier, then a lieutenant colonel in charge of that mission, Dan Fortune, who's a friend of mine, he's actually offered and given in the book his commander's leadership insights of that mission. So this is a gold chapter in terms of information. So the top three highlight points of this one is just scrolling quickly. Is firstly the mission must outlive the setback. So the mission goes on. Elite organisations refuse to allow consequence to define their future. The mission must outlive the setback. Number two, regeneration is deliberate. Capability is rebuilt through leadership, accountability, learning, and adaptation. It's deliberate. It doesn't happen by accident. And three, continuity requires change. Preserving the mission often requires changing the methods, systems, and behaviours used to achieve it. So that's the last kinetic, and I've added another chapter here just to finish off the book, which is very, very important, and it's about I call it the high ground. This is ecological stewardship of teams, and the opening quote is from Aristotle, the ancient philosopher. We are what we repeatedly do. Excellence then is not an act, but a habit. The thing about the mission, and I talk about stewardship of mission, stewardship of standards, stewardship of culture, stewardship of learning, and stewardship of future leaders. Because, ladies and gentlemen, the thing is, the product of elite leadership is leadership. Who's going to be there after you go? Who's going to be there after the team changes over, whether it rotates or otherwise? What legacy have you left in your teams and in your companies and in your family? Who's going to be there? What are the policies? And this is where we've all heard of the bell curve. Starts low, achieves a peak, and gradually moves off down the back end. We don't want bell curves in elite leadership. We need legacy. And so the product, this is a good one to write down and stick it on your desk somewhere. The product of elite leadership is leadership. IBM actually for a long time, very successful company, had a policy in there that the main job for a leader was to train the other guys under him to take his job, to become the leaders, which is a fascinating thing when you see a big company do that. So, of course, if big companies can do it, small companies can do it. Small teams, teams can do it. So we're not here forever. We're here for a good time and not a long time, as we say in the military. So this legacy chapter, I think, is pretty important. And so that pretty much covers the book in a bit of a waterfall data dump. Barry?
No, Rob, I want to say really thank you. I mean, it's so packed. I mean, there is so much wisdom. You'd almost want to take time to ruminate and chew on all the many things that you do raise. I mean, for me, what I take personally away is that I come back to that the thing that there's so much underneath the surface that we carry within ourselves, whether they are from our complexities of our past, our upbringing, the wounds of our journeys, the losses and the grief that we carry, traumatic impacts. And a lot of it is unconscious. We don't really know. I often say that one of us must be sitting in a room, but we're surrounded by our ancestors and 5 or 6 different parts of ourselves facing decision-making processes every second of every day.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to make that visible because we are interconnected, intertwined, and entrapped by so much of what we do carry, which is where the stuckness comes. I think what I like so much about what you've raised, not just at a leadership for organizational levels, but it's a critical way of thinking about What do we want to think about today with what we're facing, with what lies beneath the surface? And what do we want to bring of the tools you raised that bring awareness to creating the change to face the unexpected which lurks in front of us? So, Rob, I mean, I'm very excited about your book coming out. I certainly would be highlighting and using chapters and writing down the key things that are critical for me on my journey to be a better leader, both internally and externally. So it's pure gold. And I want to thank you for the time and the energy that you have put into your presentation today. I
Yeah,
just wonder
appreciate
what
your words,
is.
Barry. Yep.
I see. Who do we have with a beard in the bottom right-hand corner? That's a familiar face. It's good to see you here
Very,
today. Don,
you as
yeah,
well,
good to
sir.
see you, mate. Good to see you here. Um, I'm just wondering what has come up for people today. I know time is running a bit short, so um, if anybody's got things that resonated for them in Rob's presentation today. Maddie.
I'm happy to lead. I've got the very good fortune of only being about half an hour away from Robert geographically, and we catch up on average, don't we, Robert? Probably face to face once a month, which we love. Look, I tell you what, there is no point in anyone, and I say this seriously, until we are governed by Elon's robots. If someone comes up to me and says, I'm going to write a book on leadership and these elements, I'm going to say there's no point, mate, because Robert's already done it. You'll have to think of another book title and another subject, right? And I truly mean that. I've been in, like we all have been in business for a long, long time. Just incredible, Robert. What can I say? Well done. I wrote a lot of notes, and it is a continual learning. Yeah, look, this could be not just a 1 day workshop; it could be 5 day workshop where you fully embed this into those people. Um, yeah, look, yeah, I'm almost speechless. Well done, Robert. I'm incredibly proud of you. Well done, mate.
Yeah, thanks. And and I think Don, for me, you always embodied this. I always say that the real healing is not from the smart modalities, the theories, and the pretty words. It's that quality of real presence, humanity, and connection, where we sit and we walk through the territory shoulder to shoulder and communicate from our hearts and in a very real way. It's not about the certificates on the wall. It's about the quality of presence and the willingness to do the hard work. And I know, Don, I mean, what I really liked about how you sit with people is just that honesty and the force of your humanity and your presence. And I think that's what, Rob, you embody in so much of what you do and so much of the conversations that we have, is that your presence has been tried by fire. Fire burns away pretension. It teaches us that it doesn't matter how much we've studied or the smart modalities we proclaim with a gold star, evidence-based, or whatever it may or may not be. It's like a tool, but if the person using the tool is not aware and embodied, a monkey can do the same job with just as much damage. So I really want to thank you for that. Sarah.
Hey. Robert, I want to thank you so much. It's kind of fun. I'm an average human being around like rock stars on this call today, but so much of what you shared, it resonates and it was so exciting. I have like all these, bullet points on my wall over here. I have like pages of notes and I still have to go back and catch sentences that I didn't quite finish. This is very exciting. And then just even hearing like Matt share that like this is the book for leadership. So my son is actually serving and he's in leadership school now, and I can't wait to actually share this video with him. So Robert, thank you so much again for coming on. And what a legacy you are leaving in a time where we need to be taught great leadership. So again, Robert, thank you. And then Barry, as always, thank you for hosting so beautifully.
Thanks, Sarah. And again, thank you for being the great mother of this wonderful tribe. And Don,
Are
good
there,
to
are there
see
any
you.
other
Good to hear
questions,
from you.
Barry, before we
Yeah, no,
head
yeah,
on?
Don, definitely Don. We're not going yet. Don.
Have you guys ever seen one of those videos where a tiny little car is hauling these massive boats, right? It seems so out of character for the tiny little car to do that. But what we got to realize, and what I got from this message, is that everybody's got a steering wheel in front of them. We don't know who's watching, who might be attaching to the back of us, right? You just make sure you focus on your steering wheel and then go in the right direction. And because I really like that, it really resonated with me, this idea that you're leading yourself in a way that like other people are watching and can sort of hitch their boat to it when you're not looking, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Don. Yeah, yeah. And Don, I also want to say thank you for the spirit of who you are that you bring to the healing place when you sit with people. I mean,
I
that
appreciate
always
that.
stood with me for a long time, and it was just wonderful to see you here today as well.
I look
Love
forward
to
to
have you
talking to
back
you
more
soon in
often.
the future.
That'll be cool. Anything else come up before we, are we good? Okay, so just on behalf of Sarah, thank you. Rob, for your time and the generosity of sharing your manuscript. Really looking forward to your book being published. And for those that are listening today that did not make today, welcome to this extraordinary group. Keep an eye out for Robert's shout out when the book is available. And also just feel free to join this group. We love it when new people do come in and share your stories. This is about veterans in conversation. And as you can see, whether you're a veteran, if you've got a story that's worth sharing and that can help others move forward, we'd love to have you join us, or just come and join us and hang out with us and bring a cup of coffee. So thank you, everyone, today. Rob, thank you. Maddie, Don, Sarah, and Michelle, Hayden, good to see you all. And we'll close off, but hang in there because we always have a few minutes just to kind of do a debrief. But thanks. And Scott and I will be back together as a team. I'm not sure whether he's my podcast wife or podcast husband. We're still having a sort of gender conversation around that one, but I'm looking forward to
Your relationship's still being defined. Yes.
it's been defined biologically, and I'm looking forward to him returning next month. So thank you all.
Thanks, Robert.